We're gonna talk about comics from Devil's Due.
Hey, Mark here, interrupting the regular jingle to announce that with the end of the first era of Devil's Due, with issue 43 and the end of the Brandon Jerwa era, we're starting a brand new Devil's Due era of America's Elite. And with it comes a brand new jingle. Play that, VT.
Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
G.I. Joe, the very best, America's elite. Eliter than all the rest, trained to have no flaws. Defending liberty across the land, valor oversized. Bring out that big brass band, real heroes verified. Gotta read them all, you must agree. Elitist in history, G.I. Joe. Oh, there can be no end in a world we must defend. G.I. Joe, gotta read them. A courageous crew. Their colors red, white, and blue. Mess with them and they'll shoot you. G.I. Joe, gotta read them all. Gotta read them all. Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the best and longest running dedicated G.I. Joe comics podcast. Now, if you are new to the show, you can find out all of the details at the website talkingjoe.co.uk. From there, you can join our Facebook, you can like our YouTubes, you can follow our Instagrams, and all of that good stuff. Now, today, we are continuing our look at the disavowed era of G.I. Joe with G.I. Joe, America's Elite, Issue 0, The Newest War. This was from Devil's Due, June 2005, and followed hot on the heels of the end of the last Brandon Jerwa issue and the first series from Devil's Due/Image. This is the first issue of the Joe Casey run, which runs up to issue 18. So a fairly significant run of issues. Now, before we get too far into it, let me introduce an American Elite co-host. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
How you doing, Tim?
I am good, and I am excited to talk about this Devil's Due relaunch because I was on board. I had started the original Devil's Due comic with its first issue in 2001. I stayed for about 10 issues. I checked back in for issue 21 and I did not come back. But when this new series was announced, the fact that it was a new start with a different writer and a different artist were both interesting to me, because from what I knew and saw, I didn't love the writing and art in the previous Devil's Due G.I. Joe comic. And very specifically, I was a Joe Casey fan. I had read some of his Uncanny X-Men. I very much liked his Wildcats, and I still very much like his Wildcats. If all you know about Wildcats, listeners, is, that's what Jim Lee launched at Image. The story of Wildcats is that Jim Lee and his childhood buddy wrote the comic for the first year, and then Chris Claremont did a couple issues, James Robinson did a couple issues, Alan Moore did a really great run for a year or two that was mired by a little inconsistent art. It had some excellent art and some okay art. And then I sort of don't pay attention to that book for like 20 issues until it ends. When Wildcats relaunches as Volume 2, we're almost there. Scott Lobdell writes the first arc, which is fine, but not exciting. Although really, really good art. And then for its second and third and fourth arcs, the Volume 2 Wildcats is so great. Joe Casey and Sean Phillips turn it into this excellent, just other book. And then it ends and starts again as Wildcats version 3, right? Which is their fancy name for Volume 3, but it's in the title. And Joe Casey writes that for 2 years, and Dustin Wynn draws it. And Joe Casey also wrote The Intimates for Wildstorm for Jim Lee, which no one remembers, and that was good, and has a little bit of a coda of this Wildcats run. So that a writer who had been doing something that was so exciting, and this word gets overused, so I say this sort of lightly, but edgy, maybe a better word is sort of that right combination of new and old, right? So experimental but familiar. And also that Wildcats run was a mature reader's title. And so to have someone like him on G.I. Joe, particularly after I hadn't loved any of the writing previously at Devil's Due, was exciting. And then Stefano Caselli on art, oh man, this was doubly exciting. I was a little apprehensive because Joe Casey was not Larry Hama. And once again, in 2005, I thought, okay, Devil's Due, you've got your second chance, your third chance. Hire Larry Hama to write this book. And that didn't happen. And so I'm going to compare any writing on a G.I. Joe book to Larry Hama. And I don't want to be in a position, if it's Blaylock or Jerwa, I can say, well, they're not Hama. I don't like their stuff. Hama would have been better. It's a little harder when it's Joe Casey because I liked his stuff. That's not G.I. Joe. And if he does a bad G.I. Joe, then I'm going to have these negative feelings about some of his writing. So I was all on board.
How well can you remember America's Elite is my question number one. And then how long were you on board for it?
Okay. So issue 0 and issue 1 were so exciting in terms of art and color. And I think 5 pages into issue 1, I thought, oh, this guy's not sticking around. This guy is either not fast enough to keep up with a monthly book, or Devil's Due is going to mess this up and move him onto something more important, or he will get higher profile work at another publisher. And so when Caselli, he draws issue 2 and 3 and 4 and I forget, somewhere around 5, 6, 7, 8, he misses an issue or two, and then he's gone. And I think my final issue is 9. So I did not finish America's Elite, much less the Joe Casey run. And so in terms of how well do I remember it, I basically don't remember it at all. When I think of America's Elite, I think of 2 things. I think of 3 things. I think of the logo, which is the G.I. Joe logo type with this added black horizontal under it. And it says America's Elite with an exclamation mark and 2 stars, one on either side in this serif font. Because it's a slightly different treatment than every other G.I. Joe logo. Like G.I. Joe Special Missions at Marvel, the words Special Missions have a similar treatment to the word G.I. Joe, but, not here. All right, so the 2 main things I think of when I think of America's Elite. 1, I think of the cover to issue number 1 and how much attitude is oozing out of those, is it 5 Joes who are on the cover? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? And the third thing I think of is really a corollary of that second thing. I think of Caselli's furrowed brows And I already commented on this in a previous episode when we were talking about Master and Apprentice.
Yeah.
Caselli, it's really cool, but it goes so far, it's a little distracting. Everyone Caselli draws is like a very hot, like Gap clothing, perfume magazine model, and they are looking at you with like big pouty lips, and they are like frowning and like staring at you, and they are intense. And that's really cool because it reminds me of the John Buscema Stan Lee note from the book How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which is that you exaggerate, right? And there's this great 2-page sequence, it's 6 panels each, where a sequence of events happens and everything's sort of tepidly straight, up, down, left, right. And then Buscema draws it a second time where he tilts the camera and has all the characters exaggerate their poses. And Stan Lee makes the point in his copy that in Marvel Comics, you exaggerate everything. And where I found a lot of the artwork and poses and action sort of light and thin and tepid in a lot of Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics up to this point, Caselli is just, everyone is like giving you the side eye, like looking down at you. Everyone is furrowing their brow, and it's totally awesome and a little distracting.
I guess your jumping off point was also the same point that Caselli leaves the book. So was it that I guess that you were hanging around for his art because it was so exciting, and you thought that perhaps the story components weren't strong enough to make you hang around once they lost the artist?
Just to go back a half step, if this is criticism that, I'm saying this in a way that our audience might chuckle. I think Caselli draws really good comics, and all of his, what's he been drawing for the X-Men office recently? Did he start X-Men Red? He did some of, was it the Excalibur? He did some of Excalibur, in the Dawn of X relaunch? I forget. I think he's great. I like his stuff a lot. And I would much rather he draw these really intense faces and eyes than not. I would much rather everyone be turned up all the way than not turned up at all or not turned up enough. And there's a lot of variety in his facial acting. So I'm not trying to say that he draws a one-note face. What I am saying is that everyone has this added layer of Stefano Caselli eyeball and eyebrow sort of tension, which is just a part of his style and a part of his acting. I used to think that Barry Windsor Smith, the first 20 things I ever saw Barry Windsor Smith draw when I was getting into comics in 89, 90, and 91, it was a couple X-Men covers, New Mutants covers, a little bit of work for Valiant. And I thought that Barry Windsor Smith always drew people a little glass-eyed. Like they were always sort of staring a little bit out of focus into the middle distance. And, Barry Windsor Smith stuff is incredible. So as a criticism, that is the only thing that I have ever found to be slightly, not wonderful about Barry Windsor Smith's art. And I've also now seen enough of it that what I saw in a few covers was the vast minority of his work. So again, I'm not taking a swipe at Caselli. He has a stylistic tick that I think is fun and funny. But yes, to your other point just now, I like the story. It sort of felt to me like I was giving Devil's Due a second chance, and they had to get all three things right: story and art and color. And I wasn't interested in two of those or one of those. And so I don't remember very specifically if around issue 8 I thought, the story's still great, but I don't like this new artist. I don't know that it was that specific. And my pal continued to read the book all the way through and sometimes said he liked it and sometimes said it was only okay. But I think it's sort of like, I liked Joe Casey's writing for the first several issues, but since I didn't have a big emotional connection, I wasn't going to stick around to see how I felt. If it had been, let's say, Larry Hama writing America's Elite and an artist I was less excited about shows up for the second year, I absolutely would have stuck around.
I guess to hover over thought as well, the reason that we had the relaunch with a new issue 0, well, an issue 1, but also an accompanying issue 0, and a new a writer and artist team was to kind of get those, generate the excitement and get new readers on, including potentially lapsed readers. So in terms of you as one of the target audience members there, Tim, that they, to some degree, they did have a modicum of success. Blaylock mentions in one of these interviews at the time an interesting point, which was that I guess that he preferred that if he didn't have to relaunch with a new numbering, all that kind of stuff, but it's kind of the ask of the industry to get that sort of level of excitement, get the bump in numbers. And he pointed to even the most successful comics like Batman, which had sort of recently had a sort of soft relaunch with Hush and Jim Lee on the title, and Batman being an A-list title, even that can sometimes wane a little bit and have a bump from just a change in team.
Yeah, there is a larger issue here. I mean, Batman is such a cultural force that it feels like after 1989, after that first movie by Tim Burton, there's no world in which Batman should have sliding sales, and editorial feels like they should have to do something major to shake it up and get attention. But the comics industry, Marvel and DC and Image mostly, in the late 80s and 90s started publishing all of these books and events and gimmicks and making story decisions that rewarded short-term bumps over long-term growth. So, 15 years later, something like G.I. Joe, a mid-list book or a lower list book, it is also going to get caught up on that in a much bigger way. Batman's probably always going to be okay. G.I. Joe's not always going to be okay. And, we see that kind of thing to this day. I'm sitting at my computer looking at some comics I brought home to read this week from my store, including Green Lantern #1 from this week and Green Arrow #1 from a week or two ago. And, these characters have had TV shows and movies, and I feel like, no, those should be like Amazing Spider-Man. They should just run for 40 years and you don't have to, new writers, new artists, but you shouldn't have to start them at over at #1, but you do.
Okay, so this book was coming to us. We're talking about America's Elite issue 0, by the way, guys. This was coming to us from the creative team of writer Joe Casey, pencils Stefano Caselli, inks Andrew Pepoy, colors Sundar Raj, lettering Steve Seeley, edited by Mark Powers, and associate editor Mike O'Sullivan. So we've talked quite a bit about Stefano Caselli previously in our Master and Apprentice episode. So just to note that he was joining this book following on from work on Master and Apprentice, Aftermath's Defects, and Hack Slash. So very much still the rising star. Joe Casey, we've also talked about, interestingly, from Yojo's interview at the time with Blaylock. They asked why is he on the book, and they took a quote of something that Casey had said about 80s properties. He said, "Now, can someone help me out here? Transformers, G.I. Joe, Battle of the Planets, Thundercats, He-Man. What decade is this industry living in? Last I checked, it was the 21st century, and these are cutting-edge books tearing up the sales charts. I don't mind seeing the massive X machine starting to recede a little bit into the background, sliding down the charts to make way for a crop of new champs. But if they're just making way for 80s cartoon nostalgia, I may have to think my concept of lesser evils. And Blaylock's response was a little bit of surprise, but he said it was really, he was given the book it was in large part to the scripts that he'd handed in for Infantry from Devil's Due, written for the Aftermath line, and also say, had a lot of success in Wildcats, X-Men. And I think Blaylock was really looking for kind of a fresh pair of eyes on this. He says that part of the new direction was to make the book more accessible to writers who don't know everything about G.I. Joe in infinite detail, but can still tell great stories. And he gave the example of Cobra Reborn, which was written by Paul Jenkins. It was hailed as one of the best Cobra Commander stories written to date, and really, really nailed the character. But before the gig, Paul knew nothing about G.I. Joe, and everything was based on simple notes that he had been provided about the essence of the character, and using that as a springboard to create an amazing story with it. So basically having a smaller team to and not too much baggage and backstory, that a new writer such as Casey, or potentially other subsequent writers dipping into their toes into this pool could pick it up.
There are two unspoken elements in what you just said. In addition to someone like Joe Casey, who has fresh eyes on the property, Joe Casey had some heat. And I think I was implying that with my long description of some of his writing career before that, but I didn't actually say it, so I want to say it. Joe Casey had some heat. His writing was considered cool. He was considered cool. And so him on G.I. Joe is a get. Number 2, Wizard Magazine. In that list of books that in the yojo.com interview is being quoted back to Blaylock for context, yes, books like G.I. Joe and Transformers and Battle of Planets are burning up the charts. And I'm a biased witness here. I think G.I. Joe and Transformers should burn up the charts when they come back 10 or 15 years later as nostalgia properties. I don't think Battle of the Planets should. I'm not being mean to Battle of the Planets fans. There just weren't as many of them. And there was very little Battle of the Planets stuff in the intervening years out there for fans. There had been a lot of G.I. Joe and Transformers stuff, even if the properties had receded. And you get one of the image houses, Top Cow, and some Alex Ross covers on Battle of the Planets, and a small spike in attention because I guess there was a home video release somewhere around there, or maybe it came back to television. But Wizard Magazine starts telling all of these 13 and 23-year-olds that Battle of the Planets is really cool and Alex Ross covers are hot. And so, a little bit of context there. I think they're both right. I think Joe Casey can sort of roll his eyes before he takes on G.I. Joe that this nostalgia boom is too much or a little puzzling, and that Blaylock nicely pushes back that it's not that those books don't deserve to sell well. It's that there were a lot of them all at once. It's like Dreamwave wasn't publishing one Transformers comic. They were publishing 3 or 4, etc.
I also had a quote from Joe Casey about coming to this book and what sort of baggage about G.I. Joe did he bring with him. So he says, "The truth is, I was one generation removed from G.I. Joe. I was slightly too old to really get into it. I'd watched the original 5-part animated series when it first aired. It ran 1 episode per day for a week. I liked it a lot, but for whatever reason, I never really watched the series after that. And I never really read the comics aside from a random issue here and there. Though elsewhere he notes that he had a good friend who was into G.I. Joe, and he vicariously sort of had some exposure via that. So he continues. So there was no nostalgia for me. I think that actually helped, since I could look at the franchise with a fresh pair of eyes and pick out what might work best dramatically. I made sure the cast was small enough to function as a team, or more specifically, a family." The idea of writing an expansive army of characters, as Joe could be if you're willing to include everyone on the roster, was not going to work for me.
We should point out this interview is by Andy Burns. It's looking back from 2013, and it's at biffbampop.com.
Thank you, Tim, for the crediting. Good stuff. And part of the last few issues of the previous series was kind of lining this up and having a slimmer team, and I think that was part of the thinking that organically maybe some of that storytelling in the last series wouldn't necessarily have happened, but it sort of helped to kind of try and set up this smaller G.I. Joe unit. So working towards starting Joe Casey in the place that he wanted to be. Tim.
Two more pieces of context. One, and we said this when we got to the final issue of Brandon Jerwa's run, this issue 0 arrived in stores 2 weeks after the final issue of the previous volume. So it wasn't a full month, it wasn't 2 months, it wasn't, as we are experiencing right now in the world of G.I. Joe, 6 months between the end of one G.I. Joe and the start of another. And that's awesome. And
25 cents.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. So, little history lesson. All right. So this book comes out. This book is cover dated June 2005, and the previous issue, the final issue, the Brandon Jerwa run, is cover dated May of 2005. So, 3 years earlier, cover dated March 2002, DC Comics published a special issue of Batman. And it wasn't the monthly Batman, it was a one-shot, and it was called Batman the 10-Cent Adventure. And this was the first part of a crossover, and the crossover was so important that DC wanted to make it so easy for everyone to get that it was almost free. And half a year later, 6 months later, Marvel at that time, in cover dated October 2002, Marvel's run by Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas. And they're throwing a lot of crazy ideas at the wall, and they're doing it with a lot of attitude and sass. And to sort of needle DC, and also to get a bunch of attention on an important relaunch for the regular monthly Fantastic Four comic, an issue, which is the first issue by a new creative team, is published with a cover price of 9 cents. That's Fantastic Four number 60. That's the run which launches by Chris Claremont and Alan Davis and Salvador Larroca in the Heroes Return era. And this is issue 60 is the first issue by Mark Waid and Mike Wieringo, and that's a great run. And then another 6 months later, because DC informally has a what's the term? Favored nation, equal nation status for Batman and Superman. You know, if you do something big for Superman, you'd probably do it for Batman and vice versa. So Superman has a 10-cent comic. This is cover dated March 2003. And this is a special issue. It's not the monthly Superman book. And it's the first issue by a new creative team, Stephen T. Siegel and Scott McDaniel. They then take over the monthly Superman. And that run is most famous for being the run before Jim Lee draws Superman for a year, which means no one remembers it. And they also introduced a new Supergirl that is out of continuity. And so in the couple of years, and I might be forgetting some 25-cent comics, but in the early to mid 2000s, there were a bunch of fun stunts where, in very high profile ways, publishers were experimenting with really cheap one-off comics to get a lot of attention. And I don't remember from sort of, comic book store shop talk or Wizard Magazine or, Comic Shop News or the internet. I don't remember how much people were talking about G.I. Joe, America's Elite number 0. Mark, you talked about how you were on the Devil's Due boards at the time. Do you remember people talking about or how the Joe Casey relaunch?
So this is probably my own bias, but I think that there, in that tight-knit community on the board, I don't think that there was too much positivity about this relaunch. I think that we sort of saw Brandon Jerwa as kind of one of our own, as a true G.I. Joe fan who knew all of the stuff. And as much as I've got we've had criticisms about the fine details of all of the issues as if we've read them. I was enjoying very much enjoying it at the time, and my kind of reaction, and I think a reaction of many, was kind of like, oh, I was enjoying that. I thought Brandon Joe was good, and he kind of got G.I. Joe, and he understood the characters and was going in some interesting places. I didn't really want to see that end, and now we got a new guy coming in. I don't know. I'm not sure about this. So that was that was my reaction at the time, was a little bit of wariness as to who is this new guy, and how's he gonna be any better than that guy that we were just enjoying on the book. And yeah, I think because that community was relatively small and sort of, I think, had a slight sense of protection, feeling protective of Brandon Joe. I think there was a little bit of not sort of fully embracing this idea of a relaunch, and that you could see a little bit of that in some of the Yo Joe questions to Blaylock about the relaunch, that it was sort of coming from quite a guarded place, wasn't it? The sort of the tone of those questions of what's going on here.
Yeah. At the end of this Yo Joe interview, there's a question, what are your sales expectations for the relaunched title? Blaylock responds, it would be nice to double or triple our sales, but that's what everyone wants, right? Don't think I've given away all of our surprises for this. Got to save something for the comic book news websites. And I think we've just referred to this, and it's not desperation, but you and I and all the readers and fans who can armchair quarterback, it's really easy to look at a relaunch and say, oh, you didn't have to do this. And Blaylock absolutely had to do this. And what I'm sort of reading in the first half of that answer, it would be nice to double or triple our sales, right? I don't know what the numbers were at the end of the previous series, if they were okay or bad or we have to cancel it. But the only way for Devil's Due to make money off G.I. Joe is to make G.I. Joe. And you must respond to the market. And so when we interviewed Blaylock, we got to ask him questions and hear answers not just about him as a creative, right, writing or doing breakdowns of issues, but running a company. And so I think you and I represent two good poles, sort of opposite poles, where you were a little protective and I thought, man, sign me up. Yes, relaunch this. And the fact that I think in the final issue of the previous series, and you sort of read between the lines in this Zero issue and in these interviews at the time, you don't have to know what just happened to enjoy this new series. It's not just smaller team of characters. We're not digging into all the continuity. It's implied, and there are two pieces of dialogue in this Zero issue which allude to this. You don't need to have read the last 3 or 5 or 10 issues. And, there are plenty of relaunches where that's not the case. We just placed our orders for a reprint of the 1991 Jim Lee X-Men issue #1, right? Just a single issue reprint that's coming out in a few months.
This is a facsimile edition.
Yes. So it will have the original ads, and because Marvel insists on continuing to reprint this from its inferior original files, all the artwork at the time was shrunk on a photocopier, losing a lot of detail, and every single printing of X-Men #1 ever since, including Mutant Genesis 2.0. Anyway, that's why we got to get that artist edition, that Jim Lee artist. Anyway, what was I talking about? So, Jim Lee, Chris Claremont, Jim Lee X-Men #1, that's a big, exciting, best-selling of all-time comic book relaunch, right? And I read that, having not read, I'd only been reading X-Men for 2 years, right? And there's a lot I didn't know. And there is a weird amount that you need to know for that comic to be satisfying, because on the final page, Magneto is threatening humanity, and Moira McTaggart is crying, and she says, "This is all my fault." And maybe it's in issue 2, maybe it's in issue 1, but there's this thread where Magneto had been turned into a baby at one point, and Moira McTaggart had changed his memory or something so he wouldn't be a villain. And Claremont, at the end of this, I think it's in the first issue and not in the second issue, leans heavily into this old story point. And maybe it had a footnote, right? But at the time I remember thinking, what? What's this? And man, if you can see Joe Casey very reasonably, starting his own direction and with 2 bits of dialogue, nodding to what has gone on before and not worrying about it. And that's totally fine.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit into the detail of it, but there's a definite sort of lightness of touch of, Joe Casey has seemed in the interview, he seemed to indicate that, he's read the backstory. He's definitely read all of Devil's Due, and chances are he's sort of lightly flicked through some of the early Marvel stuff as well. But yeah, there's a definite of touch of saying, yeah, we're continuing what came before. Some of that backstory is definitely a building block for this, but we're not going to make too big a deal of it that you don't need to know all of that.
I'll say one more thing about sort of what the market wants, right? The market was no longer supporting the Brandon Jerwa series, and Blaylock had to do something, whether or not you liked the Brandon Jerwa run. And it is entirely possible that if Jerwa's run had been a small core cast that wasn't big on long-term stories and deeper cut characters, that sales would have declined and the book would have had to relaunch. And the opposite would have happened, that they'd gotten a writer to do not a smaller cast of characters, but include a bigger team with a bunch of the established Joes. Because the current cycle in a lot of monthly comics is, it used to be every 4 years, and it's shortened now. Now it's every 3 years, 2 years, 1.5 years. You have to shake things up or relaunch. And that goes back to these sort of longer term problems in comic book publishing that I think start in the late 80s. But it's funny to me that Casey's hired to do this specific thing. And, it's like Justice League, right? Every 2 or 3 years, DC starts Justice League over with the core 5 or 6 members. And then a year in, someone will leave. Batman will leave, or Green Lantern will leave, and a bunch of other characters will come in. People who have sometimes been on the Justice League, or sort of characters who could never be in the Justice League, like Lobo or Harley Quinn. And then, at the 2 or 3 year mark, there has to be a new writer or a new cosmic event. That book has to end. And sometimes it's the sort of core 5 or 6 back at the end, and sometimes it's not. And then a new Justice League series starts with the core 5 or 6. Avengers always does this. Justice League always does this. And G.I. Joe, to some extent, may have to do this.
Okay, let's get on to the next thing in our running order, which is the cover.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Tim.
I forgot that there are 2 covers. Do you know that there are 2 covers?
There's a second printing with Flint holding his pistol at us, the audience, as the second cover. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
And this cover, this second printing cover, I believe, did come out like a couple of months later, as far as I'm aware, because it's advertised in the back of a later book, like issue 2 or 3.
Oh, cool. All right, the cover to issue 0, the first printing, is notable to me for a couple reasons. One, it's got mystery. You and I know who all these characters are, but if you handed this to a casual G.I. Joe fan, they'd only be able to guess half the characters. If you handed this to a non-fan, but who's interested, they would guess 0 or 1 of these characters correctly. And I appreciate that mystery. I actually think, and I'm really picky about covers, and G.I. Joe in comics has a long history of fine covers. I think that this is not Caselli's best work, and this is not Sundar Raj's best work. It's a little hard to describe, but there is something about the looseness of the pencils and then the sort of sketchiness or looseness or painterly quality of Raj's digital color that, to me, shows that this cover is unfinished. And I don't think it technically is, but I've always found the sort of lack of information, sort of Duke's face and everything under his chin, shipwreck, Flint, and the soft quality of all of the foreground wreckage and the background wreckage. I've always found this cover to be lackluster. It's a good cover. It's not a great cover. And it is not the cover to issue number 1, that's for sure, which we'll talk about in a future episode. My third reaction to this cover is it's striking because it's all one color. It's all this smoky maroon red, this grayish red. And number 4, this cover features what you could call 9/11 imagery. The wreckage behind these characters and the wreckage in front of them with that rebar recalls the collapsed World Trade Center towers from the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. And I remember when Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds, when that film with Tom Cruise was released, there are 2 moments in the film where there's some ash floating in the air after one of the attacks. And when Tom Cruise is looking for, I think, his daughter, and there are a bunch of photos and printouts of people pinned on a wall, like, missing, I'm looking for this person. And I remember feeling the sort of ripple in the movie theater that a few people around me recognized this as recalling things that we saw on the news or in person after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. And I think it made people a little uncomfortable, but it's also perhaps sort of true. This is what would happen, and maybe a powerful visual reference. So G.I. Joe here is making a reference, and this is not New York City. This is not 2001, but you can't deny that these shapes and this kind of drawing recalls that. And it's interesting to me because the Devil's Due G.I. Joe comic is born in the context of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, and yet the comic never referred to it, right? So, in the Marvel run, JFK gets mentioned once. The Vietnam or the conflict in Southeast Asia gets mentioned. But when it comes time for the Gulf War, the Joes don't actually refer to the real Gulf War. They have their own version. And so it was, Hasbro wasn't going to want to do it. Devil's Due wasn't going to want to do it. But in 2001, 2002, there is no reference in the G.I. Joe comic, even though the G.I. Joe's set in the real world in the comics. Pearl Harbor happened in G.I. Joe, and the Statue of Liberty is a real thing in New York in G.I. Joe. It's not like some other version, with like Cobra Commander or, I don't know, like a Planet of the Apes ape, right? Holding that torch. And so here, both on the cover and also a little bit inside, this issue now, 4 years later, makes its own version of this kind of terrible attack on an American city.
I was just going to say that it's slightly to the side, really, of the Devil's Due continuity almost, but the first arc of Frontline, written by Hammer, does sort of acknowledge the events and sort of pay tribute in some small way to the...
Oh, that's right. Good
rescue services.
Good memory.
So I really like this cover. I think it's it's very striking and quite visually different. And I mentioned to you that it's, to me, recalled a little bit the promotional artwork by Dennis Calero for Age of the Apocalypse, which featured in a couple of places as, I think, some interior teaser adverts as a poster and in previews, some of which carried the slogan, Professor X is dead. And it was sort of this intriguing mystery image of these X-Men characters who looked somewhat familiar but different, with a giant burning X behind them, sort of backlighting them with this red light and flame, which at the time sort of just really, really struck me and intrigued me about, what is this new thing, and sort of really got me quite excited for the Age of Apocalypse based on this teaser image.
I appreciate you mentioning this because I've always thought that painted image you're referring to was Bill Sienkiewicz, and it's not.
It's more likely than not, sort of not trying to give that one any sort of an homage, but it was what it made me recall, because it made such an impact on me at the time. Right. So, did you want to say anything about the second printing cover with Flint on it?
Yeah, the second printing cover looks like one of those covers where they've taken a full page splash from the interior or a panel and made it into the cover, but it's not. And my preference for second prints is that they use the same image and they don't change anything, except, let's say, the color of the logo. Or in the early 90s, DC did a bunch of second and third printings where they would put a very small Roman numeral 2 or 3 in the top left corner box under the issue number by the price. I think, if I've said this before about variant covers in general, but I think if you spent weeks or months promoting something like a brand new G.I. Joe launch, and it's got this mysterious, striking cover of Joes coming out of wreckage that's on fire behind them, I think the best way to sell that again is to use that image again, not to print it in black and white or in like randomly blue or green, or to change the image completely. And although I like this drawing of Flint on the second printing cover, I think since it's an ensemble book, I think having a solo character on the cover is the wrong choice. But, it's not like it's, randomly like some like Heat Viper or Alley Viper who's not even in the comic. My last comments on this cover is the website mycomicshop.com, which is an online store. They sell back issues. They sometimes, at the end of a listing for a back issue, have a few words to describe the cover. Uh-huh. And here it says, black cover, scruffy guy pointing gun.
Very good. I had one question for you, Tim, and sort of one comment about this cover, and more specifically the relaunch. The title, America's Elite. So it's in this sort of yellow text. America's Elite has got a sort of 5-pointed star either side of it. I guess like a bit like a military uniforms pip that you might have on there, with a black background. So. What do you think of the design of that logo component and also the title, America's Elite! ! But before you answer, I'll point out, I'll give a couple of my thoughts. One, I think for a relaunch, it's nice to have a different title in some way to help comic collectors differentiate it from other series, and particularly when it goes into the back issue bins. What am I collecting? Is it that Devil's Due issue 10, picking up the wrong issue, that kind of thing. I think that does help. And the second element is the actual title itself didn't especially resonate with me. I don't know. I'm not particularly enamored with that title, America's Elite. It sounds somewhat elitist, literally. Slightly superior. I don't know. Didn't really catch on for me. Anyway.
I'm okay with the actual title. I do appreciate that it is different than the previous series, and it's also visually different. At the time, this wasn't G.I. Joe Reloaded, so this isn't that comparison to the Marvel Universe and the Ultimate Marvel Universe. America's Elite is still the Devil's Due G.I. Joe universe, but in a little way, it feels like it's, we're going to make them not more modern, but we're going to do this peppier and more accessible. And so what strikes me about the Ultimate universe at Marvel is that the logo treatment was very different. You know, Ultimate Spider-Man is Ultimate X-Men, totally different from Amazing Spider-Man or Uncanny X-Men. And here, Devil's Due is using the same established italicized G.I. Joe logo type, which is fine by me, but I always felt like there's a big missed opportunity here where no one ever talks about this. If you look at the Marvel run, the G.I. Joe logo changes color all the time. And a lot of times it's white with the red, white, and blue, but many times it's not. And what is it, issue 90, right? My first issue, isn't the logo just yellow and red? It's like yellow fill with red outline, something like that, right? And I suspect Hasbro was not flexible at the time. And so Devil's Due could only use this. And so whatever G.I. Joe comic they published, right? Spinoff, Ninja's Focus miniseries. And so what they're going to change is the tag, the additional words. But I thought that this would have been a good place to do something different with the actual. I'm not saying as extreme as like the Ultimate X-Men logo is from the X-Men logo, but really just sort of some color changes so that at a glance, you know, you're not looking at the other book or the other book. What makes me laugh about America's Elite is not the actual two words, but the fact that there's an exclamation mark. And I think that might be rubbing you the wrong way without you realizing it, because that feels like it's trying too hard. And, you know, when you look up this comic on websites, you know, Yojo, eBay, no one ever uses the exclamation mark. And technically, that is not the title of this comic, though we've all agreed it is. The technical title of this comic is G.I. Joe Comic Book Volume 2. And when Devil's Due got the license and the comic book in the indicia, right, issue 1 in 2001, reinstated, when in the indicia, the comic was not called G.I. Joe or G.I. Joe Real American Hero. And at Marvel, the full title is G.I. Joe Real American Hero. It always felt to me like Hasbro was sort of not giving Devil's Due the full respect or treatment that this whole enterprise deserved. That, because is it issue 1 reinstated? Is that where there's a little like Hasbro licensing logo on the back cover? Hasbro was doing that.
Right. Yeah.
Hasbro was doing that
on
at
the
time.
Michael, what's he called? David Michael Beck, is that right?
Yeah, on his painted back cover.
On his painted background, they'd have the little blue Hasbro logo.
Hasbro was doing that a little bit around 2001. And again, in terms of, I think, not allowing any changes on the traditional G.I. Joe logo, you know, white, gray, red, white, blue, with black outlines. Hasbro was certainly allowed to put its little stamp on the back cover of every G.I. Joe licensed book, but it shouldn't, because it's trying too hard. It's unnecessary. You know, not everything needs to be sort of a tiny thumbnail-sized advertisement for Hasbro, or a reminder that Hasbro has deemed Devil's Due acceptable to continue this license. You know, it's like, no. Hasbro's name is in the fine print on the inside, and maybe someone gets thanked on the inside front cover. So that the title here in the indicia isn't even G.I. Joe America's Elite. It's G.I. Joe Comic Book Volume 2. Makes me sort of roll my eyes and chuckle all over again.
Interesting.
You know, the thought exercise is, if you're going to have to come up with a different title so that the relaunch is easier to identify and differentiate from the previous 43 issue run, what 1 or 2 or 3 words would you jumble together as a G.I. Joe subtitle for this new title? You know, it's going to be like G.I. Joe Operation Steel, or G.I. Joe Best of the Best, or G.I. Joe Silver Force Recon, you know. And you could argue that America's Elite is redundant because it's doing what sort of a real American hero was already doing. And both of them are on the cover.
Both with exclamation marks, yeah.
I'm okay with Real American Hero having an exclamation mark, because that's there from the beginning. And when I see that, I think of the jingle and the way that it's sung in the jingle
Yeah.
and then the theme song. Although I guess that's the argument for why America's Elite hasn't. Right. All right. Is this time to talk about the comic?
Yeah. Okay. Let's get into the insides with initially a plot breakdown. The American president reactivates the G.I. Joe team with General Joe Colton at the helm. This is just in time for the team of Roadblock, Scarlet, and Shipwreck to fly from their new headquarters, which is The Rock in Wyoming, to investigate a cataclysmic event that has occurred in Chicago. Elsewhere, Stalker, Snake Eyes, and Flint attack a Cobra cell in Germany. And finally, it is revealed that Vance Wingfield is the architect of the attack on Chicago. Where to start, Tim?
I actually want to start at the end. For people like me who forget, remind me and us, is Vance Wingfield the dad from issue 5 of the Marvel run, or the son from that Frontline arc from Devil's Due?
It's a good question, because actually my memory of that got a little bit fuzzy, so I did have to double check myself to be completely clear. So Vance Wingfield is from Saturday Night, is from issue 4 of G.I. Joe. So he was the guy in that issue heading up that sort of strange terrorist splinter group funded by Cobra.
Okay, so you're talking about 1982.
That is right, yeah.
Okay.
With the Strike First organization and cap that he was wearing there. So that is Vance. And then Tyler Wingfield is from Frontline issues 11 to 14, history repeating. And so he is the son following in his father's footsteps, and his mother also appears there. Right. And we sort of saw him coming to a somewhat mysterious, sort of possibly sticky end, left a little bit open in Frontline to Tyler the son. He was falling out of a plane, and Vance Wingfield was shot in the back by his wife in the pages of G.I. Joe issue 4 back in 1982. So he was shot in his back, presumed to be dead, never seen again, and now he is in a wheelchair. So not quite so dead as we would have thought. So
Vance Wingfield, the elder, the dad, the older guy, who is on the first page of Marvel G.I. Joe number 4 from 1982, doesn't he have a curly mustache?
He does.
Okay.
And he doesn't have no longer has his curly mustache. It was a somewhat cartoony, quite slightly defying physics and biology mustache, yes.
I'm okay with the character many years later looking different, but you know me, I would prefer characters to not change their hair or facial hair. I'm not into Shipwreck having a goatee or just a chin beard.
I think
Shipwreck in G.I. Joe comics should look like his 1985 action figure, and Roadblock, and Breaker, and in the movies, everyone should look like their first action figure. Unless we've all decided that their first comic appearance is more definitive.
Yeah, Shipwreck's lack of lip moustache is a little bit egregious, but like you said, I think if Vance Wingfield did have his curly moustache, or at least some hint of the moustache, it would be a sort of visual shorthand cue to help us in. Those of us less, who don't immediately remember the character, and give us a bit more of a visual clue.
And while we are focused for a moment on the end, and we've been talking about Joe Casey and the context of this launch so much, here is Joe Casey throwing all of the fans a bone. Directly referring back to an early Marvel story, or at least in a character, in the form of a character, and indirectly referring to a previous Devil's Due story. Vance Wingfield here isn't talking about his son, but the fact that he's showing up here says to readers, Joe Casey is paying attention to continuity. He's not going to worry about it, and he's not going to make you worry about it, but he's aware of it.
Yep.
And you could cynically counter that unless you actually, do something with this character that says more about the original issue 4 and the frontline arc, you're just sort of closing your eyes, reaching your hand into a bag, pulling out a Marvel comic. Oh, Vance Wingfield. Yeah. Did he die? Maybe not. Okay. He's back. And it doesn't prove that Casey is sort of, quote, on our side or doing all of his research. But I think it's a good start. And, when I turned the page, I thought it was going to be Cobra Commander. So that it's not Cobra Commander and that it is someone who it could be logically in the larger G.I. Joe story is, I think, a good note or cliffhanger to end on. I'm sure you want to start at the beginning of the issue, though.
Yeah, so the beginning of the issue sort of starts with the inside front cover where we've got a lineup of the G.I. Joe team. It's got their serial number, code name, file name, speciality, and status within a sort of a little blurb to get us up to speed, which is more helpful probably for subsequent issues. And then that kind of is sort of echoed a couple of pages in on that double splash, where then there's a duty roster where we have 8 sort of circular thumbnail headshots of the G.I. Joe team. Interesting story device, sort of interesting way of easing in the new and lapsed readers to let them know who these characters are.
Yeah.
And harkening back to, I guess, Justice League and Avengers and so on, where that device was used much more frequently.
Yeah, the inside front cover, I think, also is a visual reference to what's it called? So the original 3 issues that Devil's Due published, which was profiles of Joes and Cobras and vehicles, that's G.I. Joe Battle Lines. And then Battle Files, right. And then a couple years later, there's a one-shot with additional pages that has a cover that's a cover swipe of Michael Golden's Yearbook 1 cover. And that's like G.I. Joe Battle Files data handbook.
This is the G.I. Joe, G.I. Joe America's Elite Data Desk Book Handbook, which is cover dated October 2005. So
okay,
it sort of comes out a few issues in.
Okay. And all right, so the graphic design style of this inside front cover with the Joe sort of headshots and their stats, it looks like sort of you're looking at a computer screen. It's not supposed to look like typed letters on paper or, handwritten ink on paper. It's supposed to look like tech. 2 things immediately strike me about page 1 of this comic. 1, Stefano Caselli and Sunja Raj are drawing in a version of the style that has previously been made popular at Dreamwave. And we referred to this in a previous episode when talking about the G.I. Joe versus the Transformers crossover that Devil's Due did. I don't know if it was I think it was the second one, where at Dreamwave, for their very, 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 very hot Transformers comics, and then the company went kaput. The penciler pencils the characters and pencils the background, but the background can be a little softer and even rendered or shaded. And the characters are inked, and then the colorist colors in the characters, the Transformers and the humans, in a cell-shaded style. And then the colorist in these Transformers comics paints the backgrounds without any black lines. And so it looks like animation. And that's pretty much what's happening here in G.I. Joe America's Elite number 0. There are darker and crisper lines in these backgrounds, but overall the treatment of light and some of the lines is that sort of digital painted style. And so this book immediately, A, looks different than the previous Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics. B, looks like something that is sort of already hot, that's out there in the world of comics. And C, looks great. Caselli and Raj do really nice work. And then I see in panel 1, oh, Chicago, that's where Devil's Due is. Oh no, something bad's going to happen. And then I turn the page and I think, oh, Joe Casey is either having some fun with Devil's Due because he's dropping this horrendous event, this satellite that crashes in downtown Chicago. He's dropping this on Devil's Due's front porch. Either he's having some fun with it or he's not, and I am interpreting it that way. But the context is there, whether intentional or not. And I think it's funny. And the comparison is is it 1989? The new universe at Marvel was changing and ending, and writer-artist John Byrne did not get along with Jim Shooter. And when John Byrne took over Starbrand from Jim Shooter, in the comic, Byrne destroys Pittsburgh, which is where Shooter's from.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think this issue looks gorgeous, let's say, and clearly, a lot of time and effort has been spent on the details of every panel from across the creative team, and particularly the colors look very painterly, very textured, a lot of detail there, but not just sort it's not egregious use of color in terms of throwing everything and the kitchen sink at it. It sort of, to my eye at least, sort of fits nicely. And sort of scanning ahead a few issues beyond this one, I think the sort of the time pressures must be playing a factor, because they don't seem quite as painterly and sort of as rich in subsequent issues to this one. So I suspect that maybe Sundaraj had a little bit more time to play with on this one and took a little bit longer and sort of didn't have that luxury for subsequent issues. But we'll get there when we'll get there.
I was in the back of my mind pessimistically feeling this when I read issue 0 and 1. Oh, Caselli's so good. I don't know that he's going to stick around, but oh, this issue 0 looks so good. I don't think they can keep this up. And monthly comics have a long history of issue number 1s, or in this case, issue number 0, either because the creative team has a big lead time and they make issue 1 look really good and then they can't keep it up, or it wasn't even the lead time, but the creative team wants to just knock it out of the park and they can't keep it up month after month. And there are a lot of series where issue 1 looks particularly great, and issues 2 through 5 look regular great.
And the duty roster page, which is that first double page splash of the book, with the lineup: Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Stalker, Flint, Roadblock, Shipwreck, Duke, and Storm Shadow. They are all pulling these intense look at us out of the side of their eyes expressions that you kind of alluded to previously, Tim.
The font for the title of this story, The Newest War, the font for the words duty roster, the font for their code names, and the font for the names in the credits on pages 2 and 3 is the G.I. Joe italicized military stencil font. And that's fun. I don't think this is a font that wants to be used in this many ways. The code names in these 8 inset panels, when you shrink the words that much, I think they become a little hard to read. And I don't think that wants to be a display font. That wants to be a text font. The way that, down on the bottom, the actual words written by, pencils by, inks by, that's a text font. That's not a display font. And I have if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I have a little example. You know how the word Walt Disney is written in cursive whenever you see anything related to the Walt Disney Company? And that's not actually Walt Disney's signature. We're supposed to think it is. There's a flower shop down the street from me, which has these sticker letters that they got, and they put them in the window, and they spell out like 10 words with like the name of the store and like some things that you can buy. And they're all in this sort of Disney cursive, and it doesn't work. It's hard to read, and it gets jumbled and overly ornate and silly. And that's because that is a display font, not a text font. And you and listeners, you in your own travels may have seen some sign, or like maybe you know a 6th grader who's experimenting with graphic design and really shouldn't and are making that mistake.
Well, I mean, it could be worse. They could all be in completely different fonts. But so we got the duty roster there, and I was thinking about the team lineup. We've got these guys plus, I guess, Joe Colton, who looked like he was going to die at the end of the last series and didn't die. Possibly a case of Duke from G.I. Joe the movie, where they decided against killing him at the last minute so that he could feature here. But the team very much being Hammer's A-list cast, really, the team that you would expect to see, plus a couple of extra. I'd say like Hammer's A-list would be Scarlet, Snake Eyes, Stalker, Storm Shadow, plus the kind of the buddy team of Roadblock and Duke being key characters, and so Flint being a key character, and Shipwreck being a key sort of Devil's Due carry forward. So of the 8, you've definitely got 6 of Hammer's key cast, plus Flint and Shipwreck as rounding out as being key players. And in terms of the choices, that all makes complete sense. I don't know that there's any of those people that I'd say leave them out, or, look who's missing. And at the time, Casey said, was asked about the kind of that short list of characters, and he said that he didn't write characters that he didn't like. Part of the initial pitch to G.I. Joe was the cast, and they agreed with the choices, and he knew enough about the property to know who the big guns were, and that's who he wanted to write about.
There's a little subtext here, which every G.I. Joe writer and every comics writer who's writing a team book, there are a lot of white males on the G.I. Joe team, and when you tell a story, you have to mix it up, right? So we're gonna have some team members who aren't male. I'm gonna have some team members who aren't white. And I guess you go a step further, because Storm Shadow's from Japan. So we're going to have team members. I mean, it's a real American hero, right? They're all born in America, except for Action Force. So you turn the page, and it's the White House. The president's talking to Joe Colton. And I don't know that we're getting any new listeners for this episode, Mark, because we're starting at a big relaunch. But I feel like in the way that this comic is reintroducing a lot of things, when I was reading this comic, I thought, I should say this out loud in the podcast. Joseph Colton, of course, is this link for G.I. Joe mythology and continuity back to the original 1960s action figure in the real world, and is this character who's created in 1994 in the real world where you and I are talking, where for the anniversary of G.I. Joe, there's an action figure made at both the 12-inch size and the 3 3/4-inch size, whose code name is G.I. Joe, and whose real name is revealed to be Joseph Colton. The idea being that the 80s G.I. Joe does have a link to some version in a story of the 60s G.I. Joe, sort of.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I was trying to figure it out where the name Joe Colton first originated.
Oh, I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk Bazigian's son is named Colton.
Indeed. So it was a Hasbro edict back in 1994 when they were making the 3 3/4-inch version of the original G.I. Joe. That's where they came up with the file name.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use the word edict. I'd use the word decision. Yeah. So Kirk Bazigian was the vice president of Boys Toys marketing by then. And even though he was sort of high enough up that he might not make a ton of G.I. Joe decisions, he was still involved in G.I. Joe. And so he named so the character's first name is Joe because of G.I. Joe. And his last name is a reference to a Hasbro employee, a family member. So this scene where the president is talking to Joe Colton, the president in one word balloon sort of waves off General Ray. And the thing that strikes me about this scene is that Casey is holding back the Joes. He starts on, everyday people in a terrible scene. I mean, we don't even see people. We mostly see Chicago, right? And then he goes to politics and the military brass. And then when you turn the page to pages 6 and 7, you finally get the Joes. So he's holding back a little bit for, drama's sake. The coloring and the lighting on this might be, I don't know, this might be my printed copy. Some of the pages in my copy of issue 0, some of the word balloons. So here on pages 6 and 7, the word balloons, all the lettering is slightly blurry, like the letters got stamped and then slightly stamped a second time. Not like a printing error, but like printed a tiny bit too dark. And I find this whole scene in the Oval Office.
Might just be your copy. I can't see that.
Okay. I think this is a printing issue. But this scene is printed particularly dark. And I think Sanjay Raj may have been using a lot of high bright brights and dark darks, and these 2 pages feel darker than sort of everything else in the issue for me. I like how much drama Caselli gets out of 2 people talking. And this is not something we have had with some previous G.I. Joe artists at Devil's Due. When Caselli draws the president with his hand in his pocket in panel 2 of this 2 pages in the White House, the camera is at 3 feet. The camera's at waist height on the president. When on the right page, page 5 of this comic, panel 2, when Colton is talking and he's got his hands clasped together and he's saying, "That's a matter of opinion. This is a different world." Caselli has the camera below Colton's head and tipped up. And Caselli does this a lot. He keeps a low horizon line in many of his panels, or the horizon line is completely out of the panel below it, and he tips the camera up. And this is essential to create drama and presence for action comics and visual storytelling, comics and storyboarding. And, the panel right below it, where the president says, "Not sure I appreciate the inference, General," you are allowed to have the camera higher than someone looking down at them. You're certainly allowed to do that. But at the bottom of the next page, when Roadblock is saying, "Now let's talk about peppers. For my money, I say habanero all the way." Right? The camera is below Roadblock and tipped up. It's looking at him just a little bit. And every time you do that, you give your dramatic characters, your action heroes, a little bit more presence and power and size. And that combined with good anatomy and good storytelling and just a lot of pep. And just, Caselli just like draws the heck out of a lot of things, like this kitchen, right? And hair and costumes. The art is really exciting throughout this issue. What we don't get much focus on in this issue is vehicles. They are there. There's a helicopter, there's some planes, there's a tank. But if you actually look page by page in this issue number 0, though vehicles appear, and they are a part of the story, they're not an afterthought, but they're in that direction. Casey's definitely more interested, at least in sort of a crowded issue number 0. I don't mean crowded bad. I mean just a lot's going on, a lot of characters. Casey doesn't have room to sort of let you like really see any of the vehicles or love them in the way that in some Hama stories, a Joe calls out a vehicle and then the Joes do something with that vehicle and the vehicle driver or pilot tells you about it because they're toys to sell. And because Hama's into the gear of it. And This is not an insult. This is an observation. Casey is not into the gear of this.
Yeah.
He's using the gear of it, but he's not into it.
Yeah. Well, we do have vehicles there. They're quite sort of classic G.I. Joe vehicles. We've got a HISS tank. We have got that new helicopter gunship thing that they have that keeps on appearing. We have a fleet of Sky Strikers, and there we've got those miniature green hovery fly things. What are those called, Tim?
The Skyhawk.
Skyhawk. Yeah, because those never got released in the UK. I don't. One of those ones that's a bit of a mental blind spot for me.
Caselli draws those Sky Strikers a little stubby. I actually thought they were.
Yeah, a little stubby, aren't they?
I actually thought they were the. What's the F-16 with the handle that you can hold that came out in 1993, or was there a jet that came out in like 2002 that I don't like?
Yeah, there is like a sort of stubby version of the Sky Striker, isn't there? It's,
I thought this was that.
There was the Storm Eagle in 1992, which is the one with the handle that you mentioned. There was the Ghost Striker X-16 from 1993. And later on, there was a Thunderwing jet in 2004. But this picture looks too much like the Sky Striker.
Okay. Page 8, which is, it's after you turn the page from the scene with Roadblock in the kitchen. Page 8, panel 2, Scarlet is talking to Shipwreck and Roadblock. And this panel has a weak composition. I'm not talking about the camera placement in terms of how high it is looking down. That's fine. I'm talking about Caselli's actual arrangement within a square or a rectangle of elements of positive space, like a character or a chair or a gun, and negative space, like the space around them. Caselli may not know where the letterer is going to put the word balloons here. He may be working from a plot, not a script. He may be working from a script that gets changed. But listeners, if you've looked at this panel and you've never had a problem with it, great. I look at this panel and I think, ugh, there's all of this uninteresting and oddly balanced empty space.
Oh, right. You're talking about the panel where Scarlet is sort of just on her own with Shipwreck and Roadblock in the bottom left-hand corner. And she's just surrounded by kind of dead space, essentially.
Yeah. Well, you said, yes, they're in the bottom left-hand corner.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is not a deal breaker for me. This is not me saying, Stefano Caselli is not ready for prime time. It's hard to do 22 pages of comics in a month. And, this issue is beautiful. It happens again on page 20, panel 3. This is the second from the last page of the comic. And it's a wordless panel with a bunch of helicopters flying over Chicago. And the placement of the helicopter on the left is weird because it's touching the bottom of the panel, which flattens the panel, right? It diminishes the sense of depth, and it also sort of grounds the helicopter. Like, I don't believe the helicopter is not in the sky and on the ground or sitting on a building, but graphically, when you have the part of the helicopter, its nose, touching the edge of the panel, graphically that says that helicopter is sort of like stuck there. And then it happens again with the rotor blades. And these rotor blades shouldn't be drawn where you can see them. They should be drawn like a blur. And so Stefano Caselli's art, I really like it. But from the get-go with his G.I. Joe work, through when he gets to Marvel a couple years later and he draws Amazing Spider-Man, to even recently when he's been drawing books for the X Office, some of his panel compositions, and I'm not talking about page layout, I'm talking about elements within a panel, right? His pages I can read. Storytelling's clear panel to panel. But he has some awkward or boring panel compositions, and it's sort of lightly consistent throughout his work. And if you can't see it, that's great. Don't worry about it. But I see it, and I, like that panel, Scarlet pointing, and I think, oh man, this panel just needs sort of two more elements, like a table on one side of Scarlet and a chair, and something needs to overlap something. Or this shouldn't be a square, this should be a rectangle. Or Shipwreck and Roadblock need to be more in the panel. or there need to be war word balloons.
Yeah. So Storm Shadow's on the G.I. Joe team. What's that all about, Tim?
Well, I think Casey is gonna nod to established readers and say, yes, here's a Marvel reference. Yes, I'll pick up a little bit of what's been happening at Devil's Due. But also, he's gonna drop some stuff or ignore some stuff or insert something that's just interesting and make it work. And so wherever Storm Shadow was in the previous run, and I'm trying to remember from, I guess technically this takes place after Master and Apprentice 1 and 2. So Storm Shadow says, I can't be near you. I'm too dangerous because I'm still a little brainwashed and I'm sort of a cobra and I'm angry at Snake Eyes, but I love him. Is that where we left him?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to quite pitch where Master and Apprentice 2 fits into the grand scheme of things. So there was that, yeah, which I think you're essentially right, is that's where he was. There was also Arashikage Showdown, slightly out of continuity, but still in a similar place. He's the outsider, but kind of still with that bond. And in the main books continuity, I think we last saw him. He helped Duke with the prison breakout, and there was somewhat of a reconciling, but he kind of left it again that he was in a place where everything was quite right and stable.
I don't think we've said this yet. It's a year after the events of issue 43. And I don't think that's in this issue. I think you have to get that from interviews or the original solicit. And I'm reading what I believe is the original solicit. A new era of greatness for G.I. Joe begins here. The newest war. This is it, the subject of excitement, discussion, and controversy. Joe Casey takes on the Joes. Who will make the cut? Who will lead them? A year has passed since the events of G.I. Joe 43. The world has grown even more chaotic. And when a tragedy of mythic proportions is visited upon Chicago, you already did a plot breakdown. But for how immediate this issue feels, coming out only 2 weeks after the previous issue, there's a contrast, which is that there's this big time jump so that in terms of story, Joe Casey can either wave away any concerns that readers have. But what about Storm Shadow? He shouldn't be here. Well, some stuff has happened and he's back. And maybe Casey would get around to it. Maybe he purposefully never would. Maybe he's leaving it open so someone else might. But this is how comics work. So I'm fine with the big time jump. I was never convinced by Storm Shadow sort of staying with Cobra, never coming fully out of the brainwashing, which had happened at the end of the Hama run, right? But got cut short. So I'm fine with a sort of underexplained, don't worry about it. Storm Shadow's here because he's really cool. It'll create some conflict on the Joe team. And I don't need to see him sort of helping Cobra Commander again, in year 5 of Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics.
And when we first see him, he's sort of kneeling in front of, some candles, and there's a jade dragon statue or something in the foreground, and possibly intentionally, it's kind of meant to make a bit of mystery as where is he? But I guess there's a speech bubble there, which is all hands alert, primary team is away, which sort of, I guess the speakers blaring out and indicating that he's on base, and then the third panel of Storm Shadow. This sort of close-up of his face, eyes wide, tiny little pupils, like he's just had a wasp sting him on his bum or something. What's meant to be happening in that panel? Is he just getting a bit excited by the alert and getting ready to move it?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think the idea is that he is meditating in the first panel and in the second panel. And then in the third panel, he
awake.
He opens his eyes and he doesn't gasp, but the audience does. This is one of those things where I think if this was a movie, there'd be sort of an intense, sort of pulsing sound or musical crescendo. And comics can maybe do this with sound effects, but this kind of comic doesn't have that kind of sound effect. And so yeah, in terms of story, this note is a little vague to me, but I'm okay with it.
So we've not done this for a while, but let's have a bit of G.I. Joe fashion.
Armani, Prada, Versace too. Joe's changed their outfits from black to blue. Duke and Hawk, look but don't gawk. Changing their kit, whoa, is that legit? Swapping camo jackets, headgear and boots. It's now neon colours and funky spacesuits. Sci-fi stalker and even Roadblock. While Bill, Flint and Mutt gave me a shock. So go take a walk if clothes aren't your passion. Cause it's comic book talk and lovely G.I. Joe fashion.
And let's talk about Storm Shadow, his new look. So he's very close to his B2 look with that white costume with the kind of the black urban camo. There's a lot more sort of noodling going on. We can see a better look at his costume later on when he's talking to Joe Colton in the ready room, whatever it is. It's he's hood up, sort of piping down his mask, some sort of I guess noodling of the details like the clasps and stuff. But it's quite a cool look for Storm Shadow. It's certainly improvement on the previous look that he had. This white and sort of light and darker kind of camo prints on it. It fits well, I think.
Yes, I'm glad that there are between 0 and 1 Cobra logos on this Storm Shadow costume, because the previous one had
35.
Jokes aside, I think it was 5, which is silly. And it's so not only is he not a Cobra, so he shouldn't have them. Even if he was to take those off, I thought that costume was sort of too like superhero mountain climber action figure for a ninja. So I appreciate, didn't the previous one have like knee pads or shoulder pads? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the version 1 Storm Shadow costume is so simple, and the version 2 is so elegant, and it's hard to improve on that. So for version 3, what do? They don't change much. I'm talking about action figures. So I turn the page, and a Hiss tank is crashing into a space with some Cobra soldiers, and I don't actually know, Mark, what's that thing that's over and behind the Cobra soldier's helmet on the right?
It looks like something being knocked over, something like industrial, perhaps.
Yeah, it's like a basket or a crate that was hanging from the ceiling or a higher level, or it's a catwalk that's pulled apart from the wall and is falling. And I don't think it's dirt. I feel like it's a bag of something, like giant bag of, corn or feed or something. And I get the sense, this is not a criticism, this is sort of a playful comparison. I feel like if this is a Larry Hama scene, we would know what that is. Or we would sort of know what kind of space this is. But other than the fact that it's sort of a warehouse or maybe a factory, we don't really know what it is. And some of that is because Casey doesn't tell us in captions. Characters don't identify it in story. And, Stalker hasn't been like repped in a previous page. And part of that is because the actual finish of the background could be a little sharper, a little more detail. This is not a major complaint, because what I'm getting to is in this 0 issue, and maybe in this whole series, Casey is going for a faster pace. And, you notice how these are all 2-page scenes, except for the opening, which is 3, but you have a double-page splash. So, Chicago accident, 2 or 3 pages. White House, 2 pages. Roadblock, 1 page. Scarlet Shipwreck, 1 page, although that sort of continues, right? The 3 of them, 1 page, right? And now they're in a vehicle, right? Storm Shadow, 3 panels. Stalker in the tank, 2 pages. And it ends on this button. He blasts some Cobras from this Hiss tank, and he says, "Sometimes I love my job." And that's when something else strikes me about Joe Casey's writing, which is that this is going to be a little bit more pop, maybe a little bit more jokey than I'm used to. And I don't know quite where I'd rank this compared to Jerwa or Blaylock, but this definitely isn't how Hama would write a scene. And I don't read this dialogue from Stalker and say, that's not how Stalker talks. But I can definitely imagine Hama seeing this and saying, well, that's not the Stalker that I know. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Stalker is looking at us and he's not talking to anyone on the radio or another Joe in the scene, it's that sort of, movie thing where a character is talking for the benefit of the audience. And then he says the like cool, snarky thing and the audience says, yeah. And I don't love that in G.I. Joe, but we're halfway through Casey's first issue and he gets to write in his style.
Yeah, and I noticed as well that sort of talking to your point about sort of zipping between scenes and keeping stuff relatively brief before moving on to the next thing, that with that comes a lot of locations and establishing shots. And it happens a lot through the book, particularly given the number of pages and just one issue. We've got Chicago, Illinois. We've got Washington, D.C., the Rock Base, Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming, Wiesbaden, Germany, Bethesda, Maryland, and Oregon, as well as returning to a couple of those locations. A lot of locations, a lot of establishing shots.
Yeah. I really like first issues of series. And I think I mean more monthly series than mini series, because every first issue of a series might be sort of the issue that launches the great new series love of your comic reading life. And I won't go into it now, but I have some favorite first issues, and there are some like best ever first issues. And yeah, I think we all like 1982 Marvel G.I. Joe #1 as a touch point. And there are lots of first issues that you read, particularly in the last 15 years, where maybe it's Image or Dark Horse or Boom, but it's 4 or 5 issues, and you read the first issue and you think, oh, this is just a movie pitch. Like, this is a proof of concept so they can do the miniseries, have a graphic novel, and then try and sell it as a movie. And then maybe in 5 years we'll be seeing this movie, and I don't really care about this comic. But what a fun challenge it is, or what a terrifying challenge it is to have a first issue of an established book that's a team book where the readers are going to demand a bunch of characters, a bunch of action, setting up a new status quo, and also nodding to the previous status quo, and keeping it clear and keeping it moving. And I think it's issue 0, so it's not technically a first issue, but it's a first issue. And maybe actually it's harder because, issue 0s are sometimes written so that if someone misses it and they read issue 1, that's the other introduction. You don't actually have to read issue 0, either because that was the free comic book day 1, or, whatever it was. Though
interestingly, skipping ahead to issue 1 without too big a spoiler, the very top page 1, issue 1, are the words "continued from G.I. Joe America's Elite issue 0." So I do need to spell it out a little bit.
Yes. So, and the cover to 0 says "A New Beginning," and the cover to 1 says "A Legend Reborn." So, yes, I think Casey juggles a lot of characters and places well. The issue doesn't feel like it's rushing, and the issue doesn't feel like Casey is leaving out stuff.
Yeah.
Right? There's enough of, Snake Eyes gets to do something cool. We check in with Flint, who's having a terrible time and is a changed man. Storm Shadow gets to do something contrarian. He spooks Joe Colton, etc., etc. There are 2 moments of exaggeration that in that John Buscema How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way vein very much work for comics, but actually take me out of the reading a little bit. And that is on pages 12 and 13. This is the scene where Snake Eyes takes out some cobras, and then Flint takes out a cobra. Flint kicks a cobra in the face, and then 3 panels later clocks a cobra in the head with the butt of his weapon. And in both cases, he's hitting a cobra so hard that the fabric of their costume tears. And that's a really cool visual. That's not really what would happen, but okay.
And the Cobra Trooper loses a tooth as well. It's flying through the air as well, which is a very comic booky trope.
Yeah, and I think that one, I mean, you know, I have never lost a tooth because someone, you know, punched me or opened a door into my face, but that does happen. I think there'd be, if I'm being technical, I think there'd be blood, but you know, there's probably a Hasbro note like no blood in this issue. Okay, I'm going to go back a page to this scene with Stalker showing up in the tank. So in addition to his sort of final, like, snarky, like, nudge to the audience, sometimes I love my job line that I don't love, something happens exactly 1 page earlier where he pulls up in this tank and he pops up out of the canopy. What's it called?
Top hatch, of the tank? What do you call it?
The hatch. Thank you. Although actually, where is that? Oh, okay. It's on the, okay. I see it. I see it on the next page. Right. Never mind. Stalker pulls up out of the hatch on the his tank and he talks for a long time, allowing them to shoot at him.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Surprise, fellas. You morons just fell for the old Trojan horse gambit. And yes, peppy dialogue is a hallmark of comic books and fight scenes, but like, this ain't Spider-Man. He's not quipping because he's a kid who's been bullied and he gets to sort of be free in his costume and punch bad guys. They have machine guns and they want to kill him, and he gives them time to shoot at him. And Stalker's good at this, right? Like, don't give them that chance.
Okay, we've been talking quite a long time, so is there anything else that you desperately want to touch on before we sort of wrap up?
Yes, I will point out 3-4 quick things. Bethesda, Maryland. Hey, that's my hometown. That's fun. I lived in Bethesda, Maryland from age 0 to 18.
Yeah.
Number 2, the remote control that Hawk has in his hand in the hospital room is a very strange looking remote control. Number 3, when we cut back to Yellowstone, under the panel, which has the Skyhawks and the Sky Strikers, there is a bit of unclear storytelling where Colton is in the panel and he says, but it's not clear what he's doing. He's standing or walking. And then the next panel, he and 2 other characters are in silhouette. And I thought, oh, did the power go out? Because all the sort of techs around him are sort of reacting to something, or, you know, the attack in Chicago or something. And then in the next panel, this is on the bottom of the page, we're over the shoulder from the ceiling or the rafters looking past someone in silhouette. It's Storm Shadow. And Colton's looking back up at us with his arms folded. And I realize, oh, Colton just got to the base and is walking through it, surveying it. Right. But these three panels are unclear. I sort of need Colton to be walking with a clipboard or walking with like an assistant behind him with a clipboard. I need Colton to sort of look up and like ask someone a question, or like run his finger along an edge and look at the dust, you know, or like he has to say something else. That's the silhouette panel of those 3 characters is confusing. So this note, the story beat where Storm Shadow shows up, it's a weird and unwelcome surprise for Colton. Colton has a problem with this sort of X factor on the team, isn't presented in a like clear and satisfying way. I had to like think about these panels. And then lastly, though I like the idea that in this issue 0, Casey's core team of 8 Joes hasn't come together yet. And it certainly makes sense that some of the Joes would go to Chicago to help out with this with the attack, it does seem a little weird that in this huge area of devastation where we do see rescue workers, and certainly every pair of hands is going to be helpful, there are only 3 Joes. It just sort of felt like something about it sort of didn't make sense to me, right? It's like, yes, if like civilians need help because there's debris and people are injured and buildings have fallen over, absolutely go help. But no, I want the Joes to like get in a plane and go find, Wingfield or like something,
Yep. We're still in setup mode. They don't know. The mystery is, who's done it. And that's I guess what they will need to find out next.
Right. I mean, and so the contrast when you turn the page, this is now the third to last page, and Scarlett says it's like a war zone in there. So many people. Just is someone actually responsible for this? And I thought, yeah, we're focusing on the Joes, and we're not seeing dozens and dozens of other emergency workers at the scene helping. But something about this where sort of how Casey is with his quote camera focusing in on part of it and not part of it, where he's picked only 3 Joes. Something about it feels a little off for me. And it's not a deal breaker. It's not terrible, but I thought, well, this is heroic, but this sort of isn't what Joes do.
Yeah.
Like, no, they're top secret.
They do. I think that thought is sort of slightly touched on in a following issue as well. So, I guess it is addressed in some part.
Quote of the week, 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 quote of the week.
So in terms of favourite line of dialogue, I had one that jumped out at me, which was that something that the president said in that first scene. There's a reason I've come to you, Joseph. I need a clean slate here. And I just thought, it's a little bit of an analogy, isn't it? It's a bit of a nail on the head.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a clean slate, new start, issue 0, new team. And look who they've come to. It's Joe Casey. There's a reason I've come to you, Joe.
I don't have a favorite line, but I do think an amazing dramatic line is on the third to last page when Shipwreck. I mean, this is the reason why you have the Joes actually there, but my previous point, I think I still stand by. Shipwreck's looking through some debris and he's holding a smoking or steaming piece of metal and it's got a bit of the American flag on it. And he says, "Oh, damn, it was one of ours," meaning the satellite that crashed is American. And so that's a good motivator for the next issue, for the whole arc, that is, dramatically chilling without being overstated. It's not like they're back at base and Duke says, points to the big computer screen. He says, "I have some intel on the crash in Chicago," right? It's very personal how we, the reader, discover this, and it gives Shipwreck a little moment to do something or be something in the story.
Good.
My last comment is that the back cover to this comic book is an ad for, hey, there's a little logo on the bottom left, licensed by Hasbro Properties Group. The back cover of this comic book, from Museum Replicas and Atlanta Cutlery, you can order Snake Eyes' sword and Storm Shadow's sword. This holiday season, 2 of the most popular foes in G.I. Joe history will come together in one of the most anticipated series of collectibles ever offered. Designed with the cooperation of the G.I. Joe team at Hasbro. And this is fun, but they're also kind of dumb looking. I'm sorry. For what they are, right? Like Snake Eyes' sword handle is sort of a stylized bird or panther. I can't tell.
I don't know. Griffin?
Yeah. And it's black. And Storm Shadow's, it looks sort of like a traditional samurai handle, except that it's straight. And then it has a Cobra logo at the end. And I feel like this isn't really what these 2 characters would have for their swords, even if you were to do up a little bit of something to do with their backstory or their, visuals or costumes. I sort of smile at and appreciate that these are artist rendering of sword in production. Each of these is like a hand drawn, like inked and colored pencil drawing of a sword handle. And I appreciate sort of anyone in 2005 trying to do G.I. Joe merchandise, because Hasbro's still sort of figuring out, what it's doing with G.I. Joe, and is maybe giving Devil's Due a little bit of a hard time, with the comics. And I don't want to buy G.I. Joe prop swords, but anything that helps G.I. Joe get out there.
Just looking at some of the images of these. I think just because we're seeing the handles as well without the context of the blades probably doesn't help. But there we go.
Yes. You. This is definitely a case where in the advertising there should be some kind of inset panel where even if they have to draw it, you should see like a character holding the sword. So you just you get a little feeling of like, cool, yeah, I'm gonna get that sword, put it on my mantle, and sometimes pick it up. But this sort of looks like letter openers or paperweights.
Joe Cola, not grape soda.
It's Joeage time.
Right, Joeage. Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I liked it. Punchy, did what it needed to do, sort of setting out kind of new status quo and establishing a threat and this sort of tantalizing cliffhanger. Nothing in the writing sort of standing out as being off there. The art was really impressive, just about as good as G.I. Joe has ever looked, I'd say. Yeah, particularly the colours as well from Sundaraj, really bringing it to life, and sort of an added layer of sort of texture and depth. So happy with the story, happy with the art. I'm going to rank it high because I have a feeling that I might not be staying quite so high for the rest of the line. So I'll go 8 on this one.
Before I give a number, I just want to check back in with my long comment on how Stefano Caselli draws furrowed and cocked eyebrows. Caselli is welcome to draw more G.I. Joe any day in my book. I'd be so thrilled. Covers, backup stories, whole stories. I'm sure this will not come to pass because he's drawing for Marvel. But I was excited when he was announced. I was excited on this issue and the next issues. And even when his stuff in later issues, I think I remember, it was clear he didn't have as much time. It was still good. I don't know if this is a 7 or an 8. It might be a 7 because I'm such a jerk. It's still Devil's Due.
What? That seems unreasonable, Tim.
I can't look at this comic in isolation. It's still part of their publishing history. It's still part of their ongoing story. And, as I really want G.I. Joe comics to be not on glossy paper. I really want them to be written by Larry Hama. You know what? I'll give it an 8 because at 25 cents, that buys you a lot of goodwill and leeway. And this was so well priced. I imagine that back in 2005, a couple people bought 2 extra copies and gave them to friends and said, "Oh, you got to check this out. They're doing it again. It's great."
Wow. So that's the high benchmark we're going with and sticking to 8, Tim. I think that's certainly your highest that you've given for anything on Devil's Due that we've talked about so far. And I can't remember ever seeing a 9 from you. Maybe on a couple of occasions. So
we'd have to read some Marvel issues to get there.
So what a high watermark to start at. It can only go downhill from here. But that will be fun. So next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, we'll be continuing our look at America's Elite Era. And my proposal, Tim, is that we cover issues 1 to 4, which is essentially the first arc of the book.
Yeah. yeah, since we have spent so much time on color and setup and art and picking the writer and picking the artist. Yeah.
Good. And then alongside that, of course, we'll be talking about all other sorts of G.I. Joe related matter as we go in parallel. So, Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about G.I. Joe?
Video essays on TV and film at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent stuff. You can find out more about the show at the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that points to those places. So we're on Patreon too, patreon.com/talkingjoe. So thanks to our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Brian, and Shane, who are getting early access to episodes, as well as some exclusive content. Recently, we've had about 3 or so episodes in the can that those guys have had access to before everybody else. That's exciting. So I think that is us done. But remember that
Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Laters.